Thank you all for being here. Thanks to the museum. It's a great institution and everyone involved in it, especially to Jill and to Leanne Thompson, who both helped me put this together. And also I want to thank Lynn West for the great article he did on my work and me in the New Albany Gazette. So I'm a hometown boy, and I'm a little nervous coming back here to speak to all of you. And I was so nervous, I started thinking, what if no one shows up? And I ran into Robbins Rogers, my step-nephew, last night, and I told him that I was going to mention his deceased father, because earlier this week I had a dream, and I dreamed I was in this room, and it was completely empty. And I gave the talk anyway, and I was more than a little upset. And I walked down to the Tallahatchie Gourmet for lunch afterwards, and the only person in the TG was Fred Rogers. And I walked up to Fred and said, "Fred, what's your excuse for not being at my presentation today?" And Fred said, "Well, I'm sorry, Ted, but I'm dead." And I woke up and I kind of calmed down. I thought, okay, I got to get over this and just accept it. So I really am happy to see all of you here. The first picture I'm showing is my office, and architecture is a team sport and no one does it alone. And these three people, colleagues, are wonderful. The first one is Gong Chin, and then Noelia Linares, and then Jamasi Albert. And when I started putting this talk together, I just assembled lots and lots of pictures of my work. I had about 200 pictures of my work. And they sat me down last week and said, "Ted, nobody, not even your mother, wants to see 200 pictures of your work. So you have to edit this." So I tried to edit it, and I'll try to go relatively quickly. So let's see. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background in architecture. I think I was always interested in architecture from early childhood. And one thing I remember is when I was a kid, I would go play in the lumber loft at Porter Lumber Company, where my father Collins worked with my grandmother Ludi Porter and my uncle Lawrence Bennett Jr. And I think from an early age, I liked just the smell of the wood and crafting together bits and pieces of things there, and the whole kind of art of building as I started to imagine it. Another thing is I was very much influenced by the historic architecture of Mississippi. And I know when we would drive to Memphis, which we did somewhat regularly, I always wanted to take a detour through Holly Springs to look at the different historic houses. I was always interested in those. But then maybe the biggest influence was a house that my parents built in a subdivision in the 1960s, and that my father had helped develop this subdivision here. And a childhood friend of my mother, Jimmy Rogers, whom most of you know, named Darnell Fulgham, was an architect from her hometown in Ackerman, and he designed this house. Some of you know it. And I've always remembered it being this kind of wonderful high-ceilinged space with balconies overlooking other spaces and big windows. And those are some of the traits that I like to try to find in my work today, and I try to incorporate in my work. So as Jill said, I went to State for architecture, and then I went to Yale for a master's degree. And I was lucky to go to those two schools more than 40 years ago, because that was a period when architectural history was really important in the architectural curriculum. That had not been the case in the 40 years before that. And I think it's really important not to copy the past, but to learn from the past and the things, why things were done the way they were done, for what reasons, and to try to interpret those into current architecture that you're doing. So after school, I moved to New York City to work for I.M. Pei. And Pei at the time was a famous architect, as architects go. But because he was famous, everybody wanted to work for him. Because everyone wanted to work for him, he didn't pay very much. In fact, his nickname was I No Pei. And after 3 years of getting very good experience, but not being paid very well, I passed my licensing exam and started out on my own. And so for the past almost 40 years, I've worked with some associates in different evolving firms. And for the last 8 years, it's been Ted Porter Architecture. And if you want to see all those slides that I cut from this presentation, you can go to that website and look at them. So the bread and butter for architecture firms in New York, small ones like mine, is renovation work in Manhattan and Brooklyn. I've done a lot of those kinds of projects, but you're not going to see them today. I'm really going to focus on houses that I've worked on, both new houses and renovations of existing houses. Some of my other work includes art galleries, art storage facilities, some institutional projects for offices for foundations and things. But this is really about houses. So the smallest project I've ever done is this doghouse. And there's an organization in New York, the Seeing Eyes for the Blind, and they asked architects in New York to submit designs for doghouses. And so that they could raise some money. And they chose mine to build, and it's the smallest project I've ever done, and it got more attention than any project I've ever done. It was a half-page photo in the New York Times. And as small and idiosyncratic as it is, it speaks to some important things to me. It's called the Bow Wow House. There was a famous architecture school called the Bauhaus in Germany in the 1920s, and it's an early instance of modern architecture. And I think one of the reasons this got attention in New York was just the pun on the word Bow Wow House. But it also has, elements that look like the Bauhaus in its flat roof and its fruit roofs and its white walls. And it's, once again, this historical precedent influencing the work that I do today. So at the opposite end of the spectrum, this is the biggest project I've ever done. It's a house in Aspen, Colorado, for a family from Chicago. Aspen at the time had a regulation saying a house could be a maximum of 25,000 square feet. This house is 24,990 square feet. And it's the family, the idea is the family would use it about a month a year. And its influence is a great American architect named Lou Kahn, who worked in the 20th century. And Lou Kahn had this idea that you expressed in architecture the served spaces and the service spaces. So this house, I'm going to try this to stand here and speak loudly. Like these big stone bars that you see, those are all the served spaces. That would be the bathrooms and the entrances and the stairwells and the laundry rooms and the maid's rooms and all that. And then the more glassy pieces are the living rooms, the dining room, the family rooms, the cinema, those sorts of things. Well, the cinema's in the basement, so it doesn't have glass, but it's in those spaces. And so even though this is a huge house, I could never say it has anything to do with sustainability or environmental correctness, but it did meet all of the energy requirements for Aspen at the time. This is it in the evening with the pool, and there's a hot tub, and there's one of 2 fire pits. And you start to see the kind of stone bars, they glow, they have smaller windows, and then the glass pieces are more the living rooms. That's from the front entrance side of the house, showing the mountains in the distance. And this speaks to something about my architecture. I tend to make the entrance sides more closed off, usually with smaller windows, more solid, and the back sides are where the larger windows, the porches, terraces and things are. This is another view of the lawn, and that's a huge porch over that terrace. The house, when these photos were made, obviously isn't furnished. This photo starts to show, though, I like having these low ceiling spaces that then open into very high ceiling spaces. This is the living room. This is the kitchen. Probably the kitchen still looks like this. It's probably never been really used. And if you look closely, there are these little round circles in the floor. Those are those are glass lenses that allow some of the sunlight from that south-facing window to light the handball court in the basement below. Something I try to do is at the tops of stairways or stair landings, always have a window or some natural light to pull you in that direction. This is one of the stairways in that house where there's all this frosted glass that glows, but one little window in the middle that you can look out and see who's parked in the driveway. And then in the children's wing, this is more of the service stair for them to go back and forth between the 3 floors of that wing. So when you do these projects in New York or anywhere, you're lucky if you have happy clients, they stay loyal clients. So the way I got this project was we had done an apartment renovation in the city, which was another one of this family's residences. And so it's very good to keep your clients happy. This project was done for a family in Brooklyn, and they bought basically the barn. The barn is that centerpiece in Connecticut on a piece of land that opened onto this beautiful preserve. So their sort of 6-acre property has hundreds of acres of preserved land attached to it, which will never be built on. In this case, we took that building, the first one, and then we added these other buildings and then connected them with the glass connector. I'm not going to show a lot of plans, but because I don't think lay people necessarily read plans, but this gives you a sense of just these rectangular volumes. One of them, you can see cars in plan. One of them is the garage and the guest suite and the mudroom. The other one with a fireplace and a dining table. That's the big living room, dining kitchen with a library above. And then the original barn is all the bedrooms and bathrooms for the family. This is the entrance connector piece, a little more modern than the barn-like structures that we've created. That's the living room, which gives you a sense when you look out that window, you see some mountains in the distance. All that land can never be built on. Up on the upper right, as you're looking, you start to see a little bit of a balcony. That's a library that overlooks this room. This is from the dining room into the kitchen. This kitchen gets more use. One of the bedrooms, the primary bedroom, you'll start to see I put windows up high in bedrooms that are above beds or that are facing neighbors, so you don't see in, you have some privacy. And this also starts to show some of the original barn structure that we preserved. And then one of the children's bedrooms upstairs, which also shows the barn structure. And we do a lot of built-in window seats and things, and in the distance you can see that. So when COVID hit, this family bought the neighboring property and said, build a house for the grandfather, the widowed grandfather, and the grandfather's daughter, an older single aunt. And so if you look at this photograph, they own the land that just has the little house, but all that rest going up to the mountains, that's the preserve. And so basically you can see a U shape here. One part of the U is for the grandfather, the other part is for the aunt, and in the middle is the living spaces that they share. And this is what it looks like from the back. So the aunt has the wing on the left, and she can stay downstairs all the time, but on the upstairs, there's also a guest room for her guest, or she can use it for an office. An identical wing on the right for the grandfather. Then in the middle are the living rooms, and they each have a separate porch. The front, once again, if that's much more glassy and open on the back, the front is more closed with just the front door on the right. You go into the entrance hall. I like a lot of natural light, and I like a lot of high ceilings. Once again, this stair on the right goes past a window up to the grandfather's side of the second floor. There's a separate stair to the aunt's side. That's the main living room, shared living room. That's the kitchen with the dining table in the distance. That's one of the dining porches with the view to the Connecticut hills. Bedroom with a big window and view, and then one of the upstairs rooms. I'm moving very quickly. I hope that's okay. Okay. So just backing up a minute, the first house for this family, we call it the Black House, and it's a type of Akoya wood. It's a Japanese wood that is very durable. And the way it's durable is they basically cook the wood. They burn the sugars in the wood, and it makes it black like that. And when we did that, I wouldn't do that for everybody, certainly not in this world environment because it's a little hot, but in Connecticut, they love it. But when we did a second house, we were like, we can't do another black house. So partly because the actual users are much older, this is the gray house. And it's the same wood, they just cook it for less time. The sugars are less caramelized. And that's how we did that, why we did that. Let's see what I have next here. I'm trying not to read. Oh, so there are lots of kind of communities peripheral to New York where people go on the weekends. And one of those is Sag Harbor. I like to think of Sag Harbor as the Darden Lake of New York City. And it's 100 miles east of the city, a little farther drive. Sag Harbor has a lot of historic houses, but then, and for that reason, it has very stringent historic regulations. But it also has a lot of 20th century, early 20th century houses, and those same regulations apply. So I started going out there. I had one client we did a house for, and I don't have pictures of it, but it was sort of interesting. Over 2 centuries, the Sag Harbor Fire Department would clear burned buildings and dump the stuff in the harbor. And that ended up making this beautiful piece of land that had water on 3 sides, and the client built a house on that land. Well, you can't do that anymore. The environmental regulations are much too stringent. Another client in this area, we did an entertainment pavilion for them. But because I went out there a lot, I got interested in the place. And so I and my partner, Steve Godeke, bought this house 25 years ago and renovated it. So the front of this house is, a very modest Dutch gambrel from the 1920s. The only thing I did here was to kind of put a punch of color in the front door. But then when you go inside, it's a very different house, and it's kind of two-faced. The house originally had 8-foot ceilings. As you can tell from some of my work, I don't like 8-foot ceilings. So I lifted the ceiling. This is basically a 10-foot square window, brought this window in, opened it to the garden, totally clad the house in wood. This is another photograph of the fireplace. Once again, a built-in seat. That seems to be happening a lot. This is a photograph showing one door into the entrance, one door into the dining, one to the kitchen, one to the screened porch. The dining room, that same red from the front door makes an appearance in the cabinet. This kind of compact kitchen. It's all oak all the time in this house. And the screen porch, which even in New York State, a screen porch is really important. I don't think anybody, frankly, should build a house anywhere in continental US without a screen porch. So then this is the library upstairs that overlooks the entrance stair and the front street. The back shows you just how modern the back is relative to the front of the house. Same materials, same wood shingles. And then the garden with, even though this is a 1/4 of an acre in the very center of a town, it's very private. And that back window looking in from the outside at dusk. So this is a property directly across the street from that property. That's High Street on the left side of the screen. And my neighbors are a man named Thomas Harris, who's from Rich, Mississippi originally, and his wife, Pace Barnes, who's a North Carolina native. And Thomas is a writer. Some of you may have read The Silence of the Lambs or the Hannibal Lecter books. He's that author. He sold a lot of books and a lot of movie tickets. But they're wonderful neighbors. So I was out in the garden one day across the street, literally directly across the street from this, and he and Pace walked over and said, he's very unassuming, "Ted, we want to build a guest house. Now, he still has more of a Southern accent than I do. We want to build a guest house, and we want you to design it, because you're the one who has to look at it all the time. So it was a great opportunity, and basically at the bottom of the screen is their main house, and at the top of the screen is the guest house. And quite frankly, they allowed us to bring in all these full-grown trees, so I don't look at anything but greenery. You know, it's totally protected. The guest house in the upper right is pushed very far back in the lot because there was an existing structure there, and once again, because of the regulations, if we took that structure completely down, we would have to meet all these new setbacks. So we kept it way back there and added onto it. So this is what they look at from their house. And this unusual gable is called a jerkin head gable with this funny little cut on it. I mean, you see these even around New Albany, these little cuts. But they have a historical purpose. They really are to prevent wind from lifting the roof, which is a really important thing in Sag Harbor where we do have hurricanes sometimes. And then you can have a hip roof, but if you have a hip roof, you can't have an upper window. So this house is basically these two little blocks with a glass connector piece like that earlier house. This is the living room with an open ceiling, high space. This is the stair with a window at the landing, yet again. Another compact kitchen, built-in seating in the kitchen for breakfast table. One of the rooms upstairs, and I should have pointed out something, if you look very closely in this photograph, look at the window and look in the distance. On their older house, you see these little curvy shingles up at the top, a little white detail. So I kind of went crazy and did that everywhere in this house. So in this bedroom, you have a taste of it at the window. In the bathroom, you do. But more importantly, the outside of the house is covered in these what are called fish scale shingles. And Sag Harbor was originally a fishing village. It made all its money from fishing and then from whaling. And so this house, they love this idea. It's totally covered in fish scales. Even the bronze screen in the lower part of this picture that covers the window, it's a fish scale pattern. So this is a completely different part of the world. This is the island of St. Bart's in the Caribbean. And we had a New York client who knew the Aspen client, and so they hired us to do a villa, vacation villa for them. So just about everything you see in the foreground of the screen is their land, and it all opens onto this beautiful bay. And in the very left, you start to see a little bitty tiny island called Tortue. That's their view. So on this big piece of land, we built this little beach pavilion and then two villas, one up there and one here. Well, you see the little roof peeking out. And this is pretty much in a vernacular style of St. Bart's from the 19th and early 20th centuries. From the air, that's part of one of the villas. And if you look kind of on the right of the screen, you start to see a swimming pool, the most elaborate swimming pool we've ever done. Surrounded by palm trees and 3 umbrellas and a bridge going over it. And that's another view of that pool. And just one interesting detail, this project we got to work with lots of kind of cool materials. The swimming pool is built by the same people who do all the fake rocks at Disney World. And you know, the clients wanted to have a rock swimming pool. Well, you cannot have a rock swimming pool because rocks are porous and the water goes through them and the chemicals leach out and it's a nightmare. So you do these fake rocks. So this is that swimming pool while they were making it. And if you kind of look closely, there are all kinds of ledges and places to sit and stand in the water. There are also all these palm trees that the deck is built around to look more naturalistic. That's the living room, one of the living rooms of the villa at night. And also with this project, I never traveled that much with my work. I love to travel, but it wasn't work travel. Well, with this project, they sent me places. So here I am at a quarry in Portugal looking at rose marble, Portugal Rosa, Portugalis, for the bathrooms, and that's the Quarry Master. And that was about the sunniest day I've ever experienced. It was hot. But I like this photo, this vertical formatted photo with all this light coming in, because it's going to lead to my next picture. I've been very lucky to build 3 houses in New Albany, and 2 for my mother, who's a very good, if opinionated, client, and 1 as a spec house. And so the first one is, this is the living room of it. And I very much appreciate that Carolyn Houston, who's here today, let us come in, Leanne and her daughter Elena and me come in to take some photos and walk around the house. And I appreciate that she's kept it so beautifully. And it made me feel very good to go back to this work that I'd done in the 1990s and still be very happy with it. So this house doesn't look anything like the 16th century Palladian Renaissance Italian architect Andrea Palladio, but it does have an influence from him with this big high central room around which the rest of the rooms are arrayed. And part of this, the point of this room is to pop up so that you can have clerestory windows bringing light from all orientations in during the day. And the other thing is, from the outside, you would kind of never guess that there's that grand room in the center of the house, but you can see here the pop-up. So the lot slopes, but when I built the house, designed it, I wanted all the main things to be on one level. So in the lower part, on the right of this photograph, you can see a garage and there's some rooms downstairs, but the primary living is on the main floor. I also wanted the owner to be able to drive into the porte cochere on the left and go into the front door the same way guests go into the front door. And then through these kind of low rooms, this low porte cochere and the low ceilinged rooms on both sides. Here you can also see the way that room pops up to get back into this big room with a fireplace. And a kind of nod to southern porches is painting the ceiling blue, so it's like a bit of the sky coming into the house. So I said the other rooms basically are arrayed around this big room and they lean against it. Here's the dining room with its ceiling leaning up and being supported by that big room. Here's the kitchen, which opens onto the dining room, has a pass-through. And then at the end of that big room, there's a screen porch that's 17 feet by 17 feet by 17 feet. And Palladio was particularly interested in mathematics, and having had Mrs. Golding, I was interested in mathematics too. So I like that fact that this is a perfect cubic room. I'm not sure what it does, but it makes me feel good. So the next project is on Apple Street. Hold on, let me make sure I'm not forgetting something. So on Apple Street, this house is currently owned by Lynn Collins Milan, and I appreciate that she keeps it so well. And it was influenced by Charleston, South Carolina side porch houses. It doesn't look anything like those houses, but its genesis was with those. And the idea of this house was just to be a very simple gabled form with one window at the front and one front door. But when you open the front door, it opens onto a screen porch that runs along the side of the house, takes you back to the real front door, and also has this window at the end from the kitchen so you can look out and see who's coming. It also has these upstairs windows to bedrooms. Inside the house, a big high-ceilinged room, the kind of big wow gesture, with the window. I wouldn't do this size window facing south without a porch over it, but because this is essentially facing north, it brings in wonderful ambient light and all through the day without heating up the house too much. And then you turn around, there's the dining room, the stair with a window at the top of the stair so that some natural light comes down to the center of the house. The primary bedroom with windows onto the back. And then the primary bathroom, which the reason I show this is just that I'm always putting these windows up at the top of the wall for privacy and a view to the trees and the sky, but where nobody can look in. So then on Main Street, there was a vacant lot between Glade and Wilbanks. And so I bought it a few years ago and built this house. And this house sort of harks back in ways to the house I spent my early childhood in, Darnell's house out on Pinecrest Cove, in that it has overlapping spaces and lots of windows and windows on the back. This house is brick, whereas some of my other houses were wood. And part of that is my grandfather Trussell always said, aspire to a brick house on a paved road. And so this is a brick house on Main Street. And I'm glad he said that, because this house got a brick award from the AIA, so for its use of brick veneer. So it's a sloping lot as well. And once again, the garage is down under, and it's split level. So you go up this cascading stairway to the front door, which is kind of in the center of the photograph. Once you're inside that front door, there's a high ceilinged entryway and a stair going up to a primary suite and down to the garage and the mudroom and stuff. Here's the living room with sliding glass doors onto a screened porch. My cousins here will recognize our grandmother's furniture in the photograph. And the red wall in the far left leads to 2 small bedrooms. Here's the dining area with a balcony above overlooking that for a home office or a den. Here's the kitchen facing the street with some, again, high windows, high ceiling. That overlook balcony and the primary bedroom. High window above the bed, once again, for privacy, because it's right next to a neighbor. And the same for the bathroom. I wasn't going to send myself to Portugal to look for marble for this project, so I sent myself to Lowe's and bought plywood. And that's green stained plywood in one little bedroom, blue stained in the other one, and then the center is white stained. And I should have said starting, the first house was built by Roy Bright, who did a great job on that. And then the Apple Street house and this house were built by Scott Dunham, who was also a great contractor to work with. Big loss. So let's see where I am. Oh, that's the back of the house with some of that brickwork and the screen porch. So when I started preparing for this talk, Leanne Thompson with the museum asked me if I had any ideas for other projects in New Albany. And I said, boy, do I. I've always got ideas. And when I'm here, some of you have seen me, I walk a lot. I get my steps in. I'm obsessed with that. So this map of New Albany, I don't know how well you read maps, but it's pretty clear. If I'm going to talk about 3 things. The first is, this little triangle of land down here, that's the Tanglefoot Trail. That's Camp, and that's King Street. And I think the owner of this property may be here today, but I've always wanted this flat piece of property. There's the Union County Library. The other property is here. We're at the museum here, and down Cleveland is the old light, gas, and water building on this with the railroad spur coming off of it. That property. And lastly, off of coming in from the bypass to Main Street is this piece of property with the library here and the big city parking lot and even the electric vehicle charging station at that corner. So keep in mind, if you can, those 3 properties. So the green one, this one, and that one. I was lucky to go to Japan last year for the first time, and it was this great experience. And the most impressive thing was the way the domestic architecture works with the landscape in this kind of symbiosis of really wonderful spaces. So I came back thinking, wouldn't it be great to build a house in New Albany based on this model, this Japanese model? And so that's that first triangular piece. So there's Camp Avenue and King Street, and this basically a simple L-shaped house with a brick wall along the front creating one courtyard and a brick wall along the back creating another private courtyard. And there's the plan of the house. I'm not going to go into detail with that, but you do see it on the left-hand side more, there's a big L-shaped screened porch. And the front doors and basically those little horizontal things are the front walk going to the front door. The bottom is Camp Street. So that's what it might look like from the outside. And part of this is to show you, since I started working, well, when I started working, we only had paper and pens. Now we have all these computer renderings and things, and I can't really do it, but the people in my office are really accomplished at working with this stuff. So they did this. I mean, I work with them, trust me. I say, do this, do that, do that. But you go into this house, you might, and you're inside and you look back. It has a brick floor. I think that would be interesting. It's warm here often. And this brick sort of segues out into the two gardens, tying them together. You walk past a dining room, past a kitchen on the right, the windows looking back into that private front courtyard. You go further down, there's a living room. In the distance is a bedroom with big open doors that could open it or obviously close it off. Looking back towards the front door into this living room, built-in seat. The kitchen with its big windows onto the screen porch. There's also a side door you don't see onto the screen porch, and the screen porch. And so when I did this, we worked on this, and sorry, let's see if I can make this happen. Just a moment. Gong, that's the young man who works for me, he said, well, let's make a movie of this house. So let's see if I can do that, sorry. So he made a movie of this house, which is 36 seconds long. So you're just walking through it and turning around, looking at the various windows. Those are high windows facing a neighbor, so you don't really see. This glass wall would open, going out to the screened porch. The brick is marching out into the back garden. That's a wall facing the Tanglefoot Trail. That's a water well there. And then this is the screen porch that wraps around the back of the house. And that's stuff that just my little office can do. It's amazing what the tools are now for architects who are good at this kind of technology. Now let's see if I can find how to get out of this view. So then there is, sorry. Where the old light, gas, and water building is, I want to build an assisted living facility called the Hamlet, named for one of Faulkner's novels. And the brick, the sedimentary brick, is kind of a reference to the sediment of the Tallahatchie River depositing on the agricultural land. And it's a very simple building. It has a big courtyard in it, has this indentation that you can drive in and let people off if it's raining, inclement weather. The quick floor plan, the top of the page is Cleveland Street. There's a little parking area off of Cleveland Street. There's a way to drive in and drop people off. The building wraps around an interior courtyard that could also be gardens. It has a screen porch. You come in the front door. Well, sorry. You come in the front door here, vestibule, an office with a glass wall to kind of monitor people, a dining room, a living room, the porch, courtyard, and then these suites that run around the back, and then staff parking. Oh, and all the kind of staff rooms are here, and a nursing room. And this is across from the fire station, as you know, and I thought, well, that's a good location because there's a lot of activity to watch, and the noise probably isn't such a problem. So would work just fine. You walk in, the dining room, the kitchen is open to it, so there can be some interaction. I like this window at the end. If you look closely, you see that building that I call the Alamo that's over on Railroad Avenue, North Railroad Avenue. This is the living room with a piano for Christmas caroling and a fireplace. This is important. The hallways, well, what many of you don't know is that I was the co-chairman of the Design for Aging Committee of the AIA for a few years. So I know a little bit about things, and you have a railing, a continuous railing for people. You don't have carpet because it's a trip hazard. And you also have little areas, let me go back to the plan quickly. If you see, notice there are little circles down the hallway. Those are little seating areas for people if they want to get out of their rooms and with visitors and sit, but they're not in a dark, dreary hallway. They're in a nice windowed hallway looking onto the garden. And then one of the suites that has a sitting area at one end and room for a bedroom at the other. And then the last project I'm going to show you, let's see, is this where I am? Yes. It's not a residence and it's not a fantasy. It just hasn't been built yet. And that would be a new Tallahatchie Gourmet. And I will not take any questions about it. You have to ask Angel Mueller and Jeff Olson if you have any questions. They're here. But this would be a really fun building. And to remind you, the library is to the right across the big parking lot, and the charging station currently would be just in that lower right-hand corner. The white part is a big L-shaped building that would have the restaurant proper, and the dark gray blue is where in the back is the restrooms and the kitchen and the storage and all that. There would be a drive-through, so not a drive-through per se, but you could call in an order and they could deliver it to your vehicle out a side door. From the front, you could park in the big city parking lot, walk to the front door. On the right-hand side of that part is a porch where you could dine outside in nice weather. In the distance, where you see the word gourmet written, that's where there would be a private dining room that groups could use, or it could be an event space. And this is very tentative, by the way, the design, but then that's what the inside might look like with a bar, a place on the right for musicians to perform. Maybe you set up a round table for a birthday or whatever. Lots of windows, but the windows are covered by a porch so you don't have hot sunshine coming in. And that's it. The last slide I'm going to show, you've been very patient, is something that has nothing to do with me. But I think it's great, and I love walking by this when I'm in New Albany, and it's one of your new murals. This one was done by Deborah Mansfield and Chloe Welch, and that's it. Thank you.